guys? Hope that you're all doing well. Today we're going to be working with something called conditional statements. And again, we're going to be seeing how statements actually play a part in being able to understand what's being said or not. And again, it is especially important in math just because in the coming months especially, we're going to be working a lot with theories and proofs and postulates and things like that. So we need to be able to understand structure of statements and things like that and what's being said. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of conditional statements. It's something that's not that difficult to understand whatsoever. But in understanding what conditional statements are, we have to understand the components of a conditional statement. So all a conditional statement is literally any statement that uses two words. It has to use the word if and it has to use the word then. Literally any conditional statement, for it to be conditional, it has to use the words if and then. So if I were to take any statement, right? So if I were to take the statement, if it is Saturday, then it is the weekend. And again, that's a conditional statement just because it uses the words if and then. You have the first part, right? That's telling you if something happens. Then you have the last part that tells you what'll happen if the first part happens. And to understand a conditional statement, again, it's important to understand that there are two parts in any conditional statement. You have this first part, right? And this first part right there, which, if you happen to notice, it's always going to be between the words if and then. So in any conditional statement, that first part that's between the words if and then, that's always called the hypothesis. Always. And what the hypothesis says that this is what's starting it all off. This is what we need to know for something to happen. This is where our starting point is, right? So whenever it's between the words if and then, that's called the hypothesis. Notice though, it doesn't include the word if, right? The hypothesis is always everything after if and then before then, because it's right at the beginning. It's always in the beginning after the word if. So that first part is called the hypothesis, and then this second part, the last part, notice, if the hypothesis comes at the beginning, then something happens. Whatever happens always at the end is always called the conclusion, because the conclusion always happens at the end, right? So we have our two parts. We have the hypothesis, which always comes first, and we have the conclusion, which always comes at the end. Again, the conclusion comes after the word then. Always, always. The hypothesis is always going to come between the words if and then. Notice again, the conclusion doesn't use the word then. The hypothesis doesn't use the word if, right? And again, it's those two things to understand the structure of a conditional statement. Because the conditional statement says two things. Something's going to happen, and then what comes from it, right? In this case, it is Saturday is the hypothesis. And so if it's Saturday, we know it's a weekend, the conclusion. And it's just understanding for now the structure of those two statements, right? But that's a conditional statement because you use the words if and then, right? And now it's being able to actually write conditional statements, right? Which isn't that difficult, but it's just having to get used to the structure again of a statement. So let's look at a statement that says a bird has two legs, right? A bird has two legs. Now the one thing we know that's not a conditional statement, and we know for a fact it's not a conditional statement because it doesn't use the words if and then, right? So what we want to do, we actually want to turn that into a conditional statement, right? We actually want to be able to take a regular statement and turn it into a conditional statement. So when we're thinking about that, right, we know a conditional statement has two parts, right? We know that this statement has two parts, and the two parts that we're talking about is a bird, right? We have a bird, that's the first part. And then the second part is it has two legs, right? So those are our two parts, right? We know that we're saying that we have a bird and it has two legs. So now you gotta think, how do we turn that that with those two ideas into a conditional statement, right? Again, a conditional statement uses the words if and then. So if we're talking about a bird as the first part, we can then write that out, right? So again, whenever it's a conditional statement, you always got to start with the word if, always. And we can think about the way we can say it. If we're talking about a bird, it's okay to also add extra words, right? So if an animal is a bird, right? Okay, it's the same thing. We're still talking about an animal being a bird, right? So now we can go to the next part. The next part, the conclusion, begins with the word then, right? But again, conclusion never has the word then. It's always everything after. So if the first part was an animal is a bird, then the conclusion is going to be about having two legs, right? Then it has two legs. And that would be it. Because again, we have two ideas, a bird and two legs. We have those same ideas. Animal is a bird, has two legs, and we know it's a conditional statement because it uses the words if and then. And again, just extra practice, guys. If you wanted to know what the hypothesis is, again, it's everything between the word if and then, right? So everything between if and then. So the hypothesis would be an animal is a bird, right? That would be our hypothesis. And the conclusion is always everything that's after the word then, right? So our conclusion would be it has two legs. And also notice too how they're both separate ideas that can stand by themselves too, right? So our hypothesis, an animal is a bird, it has two legs, right? And again, it's a conditional because they use the word if and then. Let's try another one, guys, just to get you in the habit of feeling comfortable with being able to write conditional statements. Just always remember, guys, a conditional statement uses the words if and then, always. So let's look at the statement. A 10th grader is a sophomore, right? A 10th grader is a sophomore. Is a sophomore. So now again, it's not a conditional statement. It doesn't have the words if and then, right? But we want to be able to turn this into a conditional statement. So again, let's think about the two parts that are here. Saying a 10th grader is a sophomore. So the first part is a 10th grader, right? That's our first idea. That's what's going to go in the hypothesis. Our second idea is a sophomore, right? That. So we have it. The one thing about a conditional statement, guys, you can never change the order, right? So if you're beginning with a 10th grader, you have to begin with a 10th grader. If it ends with is a sophomore, you have to end with is a sophomore. Just because when you switch the order, it's something different that we're going to get to, right? So when it comes to writing conditional statements, never mix up the order, guys, because the order, when you change it up, is something completely different. So again, a 10th grader is a sophomore. We have our two parts. Since it's a conditional statement that we want to write, right? Since we want to write a conditional statement, we automatically have to use the words if and then, right? So we start off with if, right? So since we're saying a 10th grader, we can say if a person is a 10th grader, person is a 10th grader, right? There's our first idea talking about the 10th grader. Then he is a sophomore. And again, it's still our same ideas, right? We're talking about a person being a 10th grader and then being a sophomore, right? And again, notice how we talked about 10th grader first, so we talked about 10th grader first. Sophomore was last, so we talked about sophomore last. And again, just good practice, guys. If we're talking about what the hypothesis is, everything between the word if and then, right? So a person is a 10th grader would be our hypothesis, right? Hypothesis. And our conclusion would be at the end, right? Everything after the word then. He is a sophomore. That would be our conclusion. Because again, it's always going into the idea that a conclusion comes at the end after the word then. And the hypothesis always comes between the words if and then. Everything at the beginning, right? And again, never switch the order, guys. because when you switch the order, that's something that's completely different, which we're going to get to now, right? Again, just never forget, guys, conditional statements have to use the word if and then. Always, and always in that order. It has to start with the word if, and then it has to go towards the part that says then. Now, let's say this. If I ate lunch, right, then I am full. Right? If I ate lunch, then I am full. So right now, we know that we have a conditional statement, right? Because we have the words if and then, and it's two separate ideas. The reason that I'm giving you this now is because we're going to learn about something else. And that something else now is called a converse statement. Right? And what a converse statement is, and this is why I was telling you before that order is so important. When it comes to a converse statement means that you take the two main ideas, the hypothesis and the conclusion, and you flip them around. So whatever comes first is going to come last in a converse. Whatever comes last in a conditional is going to come first in a converse. And I'll show you what I mean. And this is why I've also been showing you a big deal about analyzing the hypothesis and the conclusion. If we look at this conditional statement, if I ate lunch and I am full, let's look at the hypothesis, right? We know that the hypothesis is between if and then, right? I ate lunch is our hypothesis, right? And we know that our conclusion comes after the word then, comes at the end, right? I am full. That's our conclusion. And again, what a converse does is a converse takes a conditional statement and it switches the order. So the conclusion is going to come now first. The hypothesis is now going to come last. It's going to end up switching the order. So again, whether it's a conditional or a converse, you always start with the word if, always. So what a converse is, we flip it. If we said, if I ate lunch, then I am full. Now we're going to start with if I am full. I am full. Then I ate lunch. I ate lunch. Because all we do when it comes to literally a converse statement is we switch the order. Whereas I ate lunch came first, now I ate lunch comes at the end, right? And where I am full came at the end, now I am full comes at the beginning. Again, that's all a converse statement is, guys, is where you take a conditional statement and then you end up switching the order. The conclusion now comes at the beginning and the hypothesis goes at the end. But forget about whether it being a converse or not, we still analyze everything that we always do, right? Everything at the beginning is the hypothesis, everything at the end is a conclusion, always. But just realize the converse, you take the order, you flip them around, guys. Just be careful with that. And always realize, whatever you flip, it doesn't matter. You always start with the word if, and then you proceed to the word then. Always. Again, I'll do one more of these examples, guys, in order to write converse statements, just so you get the habit. And again, when you write conditional statements, make sure you don't flip it around, guys, for conditional statements. Because when you flip it around, it becomes a converse statement. So let's take the statement, if I am 18, if I am 18, then I can vote, right? I am 18, then I can vote. Now again, we know that's a conditional statement because it uses the words if and then. Right? Let's highlight the portions that we know. We know that everything between if and then, that's our hypothesis, right? We know that everything after the word then, that comes at the end, is called the conclusion, right? So I can vote. And again, notice how it never includes the words if and then. If and then are always separate, right? So now, that's our conditional statement. We know our two parts. If we now want to write our converse statement, we're going to end up flipping the order, right? Because that's all a converse statement is. You always flip the order. Start with the word if. So if we said before, if I am 18, then I can vote. Now we'd say, if I can vote, then I am 18. And notice something too, before I get to that. Notice how I am 18 came at the beginning, now it comes at the end, right? And notice how I can vote came at the end, and now it comes at the beginning, right? Okay. And realize something, what I wanted you guys to understand. If I am 18 then I can vote, that's a true statement, right? If you're 18, you can vote. Just because a conditional statement is a true statement doesn't mean that the converse is going to be a true statement either. Because again, if you now read the converse statement, if I can vote, then I'm 18, that's not true. Just because you can vote doesn't mean you're 18, right? So, perfect example. If I can vote, then I can be 50. I can be 35. I can be 22. All of these show that that's wrong, right? Because if I can vote, I can technically be all of these ages too. I don't have to be that age. And when we're dealing with this, all of these examples that prove something to be false, it's called a counterexample. Because typically an example proves that something is true. A counterexample proves that something is false. Proves that it's false. So again, whenever you see a statement, guys, just because you wrote it doesn't mean that the meaning behind it is true, right? Just like before, when we had the statement, if I'm a bird, then I have 2 legs. Technically, that's true. A bird will have 2 legs. But if you were to write the converse of it, if I have 2 legs and I'm a bird, that's not necessarily true. Because you can have other animals that have 2 legs without being birds, right? Again, always think of that, guys. Or if you have an example like a dog has 4 legs, if you were to write the opposite of that, the converse, if it has 4 legs, then it's a dog, that's not true. Because again, there are plenty of animals with 4 legs that aren't dogs, like a cat, or a squirrel, or things like that, rat. All of those are examples, and when you have examples that prove something wrong, it's called a counterexample. Because a counterexample proves that it's wrong. Last thing I want to show you guys, again, conditional statements use the word if and then. Converse statements switch around the order of the hypothesis and the conclusion. And then there's one more statement that I got to show you, and it's the easiest out of all of them. The last statement, it's called a negation. Which again, sounds complicated, but it's actually the easiest thing from everything we've done today. A negation is a statement that literally says the opposite of what you're saying. So if I were to say, I am tall, right? If I were to say I am tall, the negation of that statement, I am tall, okay? The negation of that would be I am not tall. All the negation is I am not tall. Because all the negation does, guys, it literally takes the opposite idea. If you're saying that you are tall, the negation is I am not tall. If I were to take a statement, I'll give you another example of this. If I were to take an example that says I am not bald, right? The negation of I am not bald would be I am bald. Again, all it does, guys, it just takes the exact opposite idea. If I am not a woman, the negation of I am not a woman would be I am a woman. If I were to say the sky is blue, the negation of that would be the sky is not blue. Or if it is raining, the negation of it is raining, it is not raining. Again, negation is always the opposite idea, guys. Conditional statement uses the words if and then, and a converse swaps the order, guys, from the beginning to the end. Again, hope this helps. Let me know if you need any help.